Okay, well, hello everyone. Thank you for joining. I'm going to start off with my introduction and then we'll go into the presentation. So I am Isabel from Wisconsin Land and Water, and thank you all for joining. I just have a few notes before we begin. One is what you just heard or you've seen and had to click through, which is that I am recording this webinar, and it will be posted on the Wisconsin Land and Water website, likely sometime in the future, and then I'll send the link out to everybody who registered, as well as a link to an evaluation when they're available. So sometime, hopefully soon, early next week, maybe even later today if everything goes quickly. One other thing is that we are going to be taking questions throughout the presentation in the chat line, which is at the bottom of your screen there. And you can just type in a question at any point and we'll be able to get them answered probably at the end of the presentation. So today our presentation will be Wisconsin's GIS Landscape with current and future data projects. And our presenters today are Jim Giglierano. I'm sorry if I mispronounced that. I'm sure I butchered it.
That's okay.
Yes, with DOA and Larry Cutforth with DNR. So Jim works for DOA's Land Information Program as the Geographic Information Officer. Before coming to Wisconsin in 2015, he worked for 30 years in Iowa at the Iowa DNR, Iowa Geological Survey, and Iowa State Extension. His mapping experience includes LIDAR, soil erosion, water quality, geology, groundwater, drainage, tile mapping, and economic and community development. So big background there.
30 years.
Yes, absolutely. And then Larry Cutforth is the GIS section manager at the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources. The DNR GIS section supports over 600 GIS users, 200 public web mapping applications, and data development for hydrography. Sorry for that. Wetlands and floodplains. Larry has worked in conservation throughout his career with previous experience at the USDA Farm Service Agency and DATCAP. And then one final thing before we start, I just wanted to mention that this webinar is being sponsored by the Great Lakes Committee with Wisconsin Land and Water, and Greg Colthurst with Door County Soil and Water Conservation District. He's the county con, is the chair of that committee. And so I think that's about all I have to speak on in the beginning. So without any further ado, Jim and Larry, please take it away.
Okay, let's see, how's that look?
That is looking good.
Okay, great. Okay, so thank you, Isabel and Greg. Larry and I are really happy to be here. We do a lot of this sort of thing together because we actually, our programs overlap a lot, and we have found our working relationship is really important. And it's also really important to be in situations like this where we're talking to such a great group of people that are doing such great work across the state, and hopefully are aware of the products and services that are going on around them. It's a great situation, and we always are looking for ways to improve the communication. Larry, do you want to say any introductory howdies?
No, just thanks again for the invite. Really glad to meet with this group and share some of the things we've been working on.
Absolutely. So our objectives for today are we really had to trim this down because there's so many things going on, but we're really trying to focus on the land and water conservation aspects of our work. And to that end, we're gonna start with an example of how we think this is going in this direction. And there's a tool out there called ACPF, and hopefully some of you have heard of it and are able to start using it. But it's a GIS based tool, and for watershed conservation planning developed by the USDA. And so there's a lot of overlap here, and I'm just kind of using it as a framework so that we can kind of communicate on kind of similar topics. I'm going to talk about LiDAR after that. Then we're going to jump over to Larry, who's going to be talking about the DNR's update on their hydrography program. And then we'll kind of finish up with kind of a future project that's hopefully going to start here in a couple of weeks, our Brown County One Map program, where we're going to try to integrate a lot of this data, and then we'll have a little discussion about some training opportunities and collaborations, and then hopefully some questions. So to get things started, I'm again using the ACPF as a framework for us to talk. And this is a tool that's been around, for a couple of years now. They've been working on it for quite a bit. It's very much a Midwest focus to it, and the folks at Iowa State and the USDA-ARS office in Ames, Iowa, really have been working very hard on this. And there's some of the backgroundy sort of objectives of ACPF. And the one thing we want to emphasize is that it is supported by GIS data. They've done a really interesting concept of using watersheds, HUC-12 based watersheds, and clipping all the data that they are using for their planning activities to this HUC-12. So it's all sort of integrated to that level. And right there's a if you Google ACPF for watersheds, you can go to their homepage and start looking at their stuff if you haven't already. So okay, so again, there's they include in the package that you download a lot of what's called core data. And this very much revolves around the HUC-12 boundary and a 1 mile buffer around that to help fill in some of the gaps. Very much includes lots of different layers like the Surgo data, the field boundaries, which sometimes are known as the CLUs, the common land units. These are not the up-to-date everyday users. These are from a public data set that was available in 2008, and they've included all of that. They also use the crop data layer, the CDL, and they turn that into some very interesting crop rotation databases from the individual years, and it's pretty unique, I think, in the GIS world. In order to run the ACPF tools, the planning tools, you need a very good high resolution DEM, something like 1 to 3 meters. It has to be hydro enforced, which means you in many areas you have to take out the barriers, like a stream, road stream crossing on the DEM. You could just see the road, not the stream going underneath the road. So you have to do some work on that if you wanted to have the water flow in the right direction. And in some cases, you may want to consider, updating the field boundaries because they are from that 2008 vintage. So just real quick, various outputs. I screenshotted these from the ACPF website, so I'm sure there's lots of other things, but these are, very typical conservation outputs that come from the tools. And just so you know, there is this tool set is based on quite a bit of research from Iowa State and ARS. The sort of main article is this Mark Tomer at Iowa State and his colleagues there. So let's see. As far as training, there's a very good set of videos available there. And there's a really nice case example from our own Sarah at Outagamie County and with the Lower Fox Basin, which is pretty neat that there's actually a Wisconsin case example that they highlight. And coming up in March, I'm not real sure of the dates yet and how you get this, but I'm sure that it'll come through your Land and Water training announcements. There will be an watershed applications training with ACPF in late March, and it'll be an online couple hours and really aimed at your community, the users of this, not so much the GIS eggheads, but the people actually using the tools. Okay, so with that, you're in your conservation world. Now we're gonna talk about our world and talk about a couple of the projects that Larry and I are working on. So we have this big project which is updating the LiDAR elevation in Wisconsin. And I'm very happy to say that we're going to have fully standardized, publicly available data probably by next fall. And this is through the USGS's 3D elevation program, or it's also called 3DEP. We actually sort of had statewide coverage back in 2018, but it wasn't fully publicly available and it wasn't to any particular standards. So this kind of updates that and makes it fully public and at least some minimal standards on how the data was collected and to certain accuracy levels. The total estimated cost for completing that 3DEP data program was right around 15 million. And local contributions like your county LIO, your county land information program, were a huge part of that, and you should pat them on the back and thank them profusely for contributing a significant amount of the local fundings. We did get funding from other sources as needed. Our DOT was a partner, and some other agencies as well, but not nearly as much as our county GIS offices. We are moving toward a sort of newer, higher resolution version, and I'll get to that, more of that in just a second. And we are making data publicly available, kind of in two formats. One is a direct data download from the good old UW Wisconsin view, and then Larry's outfit graciously supplies this in a streaming format, and that's the little picture on the right there comes from that. This is a streaming service that plugs right into your GIS, and you can zip around the state and see pretty much everything. Here's our little map of the dates of the collection, and you can see this is very much a checkerboard kind of situation. That is primarily because we are the funding is county based, and not everybody is ready at the same time. So we appreciate that, and we go with the flow, and we try to do the best we can. the way this has worked is in the first couple of years, we would get a grant from USGS and we would send that money to the counties and they would do their own contracting. And now in the last 2 or 3 years, we've sort of reversed the flow. We collect the money from the counties and we pool that and then send that to USGS and they do the contracting. And the reason for this, it cuts the cost down from 50-50 to now a local match, which is right around 33%. And so we're saving the counties money in that sense. So let's see. We have a contractor that does most of the work. Used to be called Quantum. It's now NV5, and the folks at Ayers and Madison are a subcontractor and do a lot of upgrades and derivatives for the counties. And our last big delivery will be in the fall. This is the projects in yellow. These were the kind of the final ones that we needed to upgrade from those earlier ones. And we actually have a new project because we've sort of completed the state. There isn't a lot of demand just yet to do reflights, and so this year we've got 2 reflights in Buffalo and Manitowoc. And one thing, one thing that as we sort of gear up for reflights, we'll be looking at replacing the older areas on the map, and we'll also be trying to upgrade to the higher resolution. The original data was around 2 points per square meter. Now we're getting 8, and that's again with that 33%, we're actually contributing to that upgrade. So right now, you know, for that cost, it's around $300 per square mile. So 180 for a typical county, 180,000 for a typical county, and when you get to the 33%, that's around 60,000. So as you can see, these counties are contributing a pretty significant chunk of money for these projects. Again, here's just a little blurb on what that sort of looks like. We are moving to the higher resolution. Here's the little graphic of the 8 points per meter versus 2. And then down in the lower left corner, you can see that these higher resolution data sets are actually very good for above ground remote sensing. So trees come out, buildings come out, power lines come out, and that's kind of the next thing that we're looking at. Okay, I think that'll do it for the LiDAR. I think now I will see if I can get off the screen here and let Larry talk. Oh shoot. Pause. Okay. Larry, can you? There we go. Okay.
All right, thanks, Jim. Well, I'm going to pick up and talk about the DNR's hydro mapping project. Before doing that, just to mention again, the DNR supports GIS data development for hydrography or rivers, lakes, and streams, wetlands, and floodplains. So we're really building on the work Jim just mentioned for LiDAR acquisition in that. That's been a really critical part of those efforts. So kudos to Jim for leading those efforts over the years. I'm going to go through a story map we developed about this hydro project and just discuss our work. I think one thing I found in talking about hydro is we have to kind of give our business case or the why. Why do we need to do this? And I think many of you are familiar with some of these issues, but I think it's important to start in that place. So I guess first of all, the DNR mapped what we call 24K hydro from USGS topo maps about 20 years ago. So the 24K is just shorthand for the scale of those maps, 1 to 24,000. So I think most of us are familiar with those maps, are useful for a lot of purposes. One of the challenges of that data, though, is it can be really out of date. You know, it's some of those quads were mapped maybe back in the 50s. So we started a pilot project with the support of the Wisconsin Coastal Management Program to do a pilot in Manitowoc and Kewaunee counties. So our objective was to map hydro at a 1 to 5,000 scale. So that's the shorthand for 5K hydro. So kind of getting back to the why we need to do this. So as all of you know, working in conservation, water features change over time. So this is a kind of a nice visualization of that, of how a stream meander changes over time. So no, these data require maintenance and updates. So one thing we have to make sure to communicate to people as we try to gain support for this work. So I mentioned the scale, 24K and 5K. I think one of the challenges we found using 24K, people are often using it at smaller scales. So for conservation, you might zoom in to like a field scale at 1 to 5,000 or something like that. And at that scale, you start seeing those differences a lot more. So in Kewaunee, this kind of shows some of those differences between the 24K hydro and 5K hydro. So with 5K hydro now, we're picking up a lot more of the meanders and smaller features that 24K hydro might have generalized more. And also just the changes that have occurred on the landscape over time too. So just a couple other examples of this, like 24K hydro doesn't match up with the underlying aerial photo. Actually, when you view 24K hydro at its intended scale, it's not too bad, but yeah, as you zoom in more, look at smaller scale features, you start seeing issues like this. So besides streams, smaller features such as ponds were often missed, or they might have been added since 24K hydro was developed. So just some other surface water examples where what we have represented in 24K hydro doesn't match what's out there in the landscape now for water body boundaries. So as far as the methods for how we're going to remap 5K hydro, so again, starting with LiDAR derived elevation data, that just really provides a solid base for us to develop more accurate and detailed hydrography mapping. Jim mentioned the ACPF, so we are using that tool set in our processes for driving hydro. So that's kind of the time-consuming part of it. We're having to cut culverts to ensure continuous stream flow. And, you know, our objective here is to, you know, drive elevation-derived hydrography. If you're familiar with some of the GIS processes, this shows kind of the steps involved, calculating a flow direction, then a flow accumulation. So you can see at some of the work involved here, when you first map out flow accumulation, you'll see that water will pond up in certain places. So in those locations, we check if there's a culvert in place that ensures flow under a road or other obstruction. So so you can see some examples here of where we cut culverts in. So that's one of the important data layers that we're supporting for this work, is to develop accurate culvert layers. So again, just some more comparisons of those differences. Again, you're kind of picking up a lot more detail in 5K hydro. So I'll kind of skip through some of this. This kind of shows an example. 5K, and this is 24K hydro. One of the challenges with 5K hydro that you may experience once you start getting to the point of using this data for developing nutrient management plans and other conservation purposes, 5K hydro captures a lot more detail. So we're capturing a lot more intermittent streams. So on the right kind of shows what 5K hydro represents for streams, and you can see on the left with the 24K. So that's going to be something to consider, I guess, as we develop these more detailed and dense stream networks for 5K hydro. Within the DNR, we've had some discussion about this, and we've worked with the water quality program and the DNR to define the standards for what's a perennial, what's an intermittent stream, and so forth. When you look at an aerial photo, it's kind of subjective to do that. So we expect that we'll probably have to do some field checks for that. And that might be one area where county staff could help out in this effort in verifying some of these data out in the field. So I saw that Laura Good's on the call with Snap Maps, and Laura and I worked together when I was over at DATCAP, developing data for SWCMAs and so forth for the 590 standards. And so you can see, like, one of the impacts might be as we add a denser network of intermittent streams, that might impact the area available for spreading biosolids in land application of manure for CAFOs and other producers. So the other thing we're working on with hydro is the attributes associated with it. So this is kind of in process still. I guess one of our core requirements is to carry over some of the attributes from 24K hydro, especially the hydro ID and WIBIC. Those are key fields that we use in many of our databases, and some of you may reference those features as well. So it's critical for us to bring those over into this new version, so we have that cross-reference. So this is kind of represents our starting set of attributes that we're capturing in 5K hydro. But I think we'll be looking at this a little more over time as we consider the federal standards and how we might want to integrate this effort with those. So I mentioned nutrient management. So I think that's one of our drivers that we want to develop, improve accuracy of hydro data for that purpose. So again, we're kind of adding a lot more detail to 5K hydro. This shows an example, like I mentioned, with the SWCMA stream setbacks. So that's kind of what we had before, and you can see there'd be additional areas captured in with the 5K hydro buffers. So one of the business drivers for the DNR extends to the management of small ponds, aquatic plant management, those issues. So we're focusing on capturing a lot more of these smaller ponds for that reason. So that's one of the requirements we picked up internally at the DNR. So just our representation of hydro impacts a lot of things you might not think about right away, such as boating regulations and fish stocking, and even fishing tournaments and the regulations around those. So this update will have a lot of impacts on a wide range of programs. So we started out this pilot in Kiwani and Manitowoc, and we've continued that work this year in Dorr, Brown, and Sheboygan this year. And we plan to continue in other coastal counties next year. So we're kind of working on refining our technical methods. And in the next step, we're kind of strategizing how do we gain support for this work to develop a statewide 5K hydro layer. So one thing we've thought about, the federal government has the National Hydrography Data Set Program, and it sounds like they might have some funding available for hydro updates in the coming years. They're developing some new standards for hydro mapping. So I think we're realizing that the DNR is not going to be able to do this work on our own. We're going to have to partner with the federal government, counties, really any other partners we can find to get it done. So I think what we're thinking about is, well, what are our requirements for the DNR on top of what the federal government wants for the National Hydrography Data Set? And I think I would encourage counties to think of the same thing. What are your requirements for hydro that might be different than the feds and the state? But I think what we'd like to do is, over the next year or two, is kind of try to put together a partnership for that effort. I think it's a good strategy that we could start with the NHD and the new version of it and add on what our requirements are to get this done. So I think that's what I have. I'll throw a link in the chat to the story map. You can take a closer look at it. Again, thanks to the Wisconsin Coastal Management Program for their support of this effort and work. And I guess I'll throw it back to Jim and take it from here.
Okay, oops, gotta get rid of my email. Okay, we're back. So yeah, Larry made a lot of good points about this is a massive effort to redo this layer. It's probably going to involve all the pieces of government and maybe even some NGOs and academic partners. Other states have started it. In Michigan, they're a couple years ahead of this, and then on the other end, the USGS process is kind of a couple years out, maybe. They've been working on it for a long time, and they're trying to weave it into an international standard for hydrography. So that's pretty freaky. And but at least we've kind of got some of the base layers. And with the LiDAR, we have to do this hydro enforcement business. So I know a lot of counties are collecting culverts. You know, those are going to be critical to making a good product. And then you know, this is a watershed based program. So we've got to stitch together you know, all our county LiDAR products so that we can do justice to the watershed aspects. Okay. The next thing I'm going to talk about is land cover, and as I mentioned in the ACPF world, they've merged two things. They've merged the common land units, or like as they like to call it, the field boundaries, because they're not the up-to-date CLUs. And the crop data layer, which is you know, our good old Landsat 30-meter based land cover. And you know, through that aggregation, they get some really interesting things like crop rotation patterns, because the CDL is produced every year, and so those are, again, pretty unique. Where we see some interesting things coming up in the next year or 2 years. NOAA has something called the Coastal Change Analysis Program, or CCAP, and they've been doing a 30-meter land cover with their 14 classes for the last 10 years or so, going back to the 70s. And you know, on the picture here, that's the piece in the middle, and that's very similar to what the resolution that you get with the CDL layers and you know, the raw CDL layers and other things. But as you can see on the aerial photograph, there's a lot of stuff there that's not represented. And on the right is kind of where this is going. This is a very early version of the 1 meter CCAP, but it doesn't have all the classes, so it's missing some of the finer detail. But you can see that it does certainly improve on the resolution and able to map urban areas on a much finer scale. And then at the you know, in rural areas, that would mean being able to map much more finer detail in fields and forest lands, and get those boundaries a little bit better. Here's another blurb from NOAA. And these are the classes that they are targeting. They have several developed classes. They're pretty weak on the cultivated pasture, grassland stuff, but they do include forest land and lots of different wetland classes, which is nice. So this is kind of the target, going from, again, the 30-meter to the 1 meter, and doing sort of a good job to get these classes accurately represented. So this is a product it's from NOAA. It's mainly in the coastal regions of the country, and that includes the Great Lakes. So this is a little blurb of normally what the CCAP covers in Wisconsin. So you can see it's probably close to half of the state, and they've got some Great Lakes restoration funding to do the coastal areas in the next 2 years. So we'll start to see those starting in April. They have like a phase 1 and a phase 2. The phase 1 is developed cover classes, forest classes, and water, and then all those wetland classes come later, and also the agricultural areas. So we've talked to them quite a bit about this. They've given us a couple of estimates on what it would do to complete the whole state. and we're again kind of looking for partners, kind of looking at change under the couch cushion sort of thing, and we think this is doable. So it would be a be a very big improvement in our ability to do sort of very finer scale modeling with this type of data, especially watershed features, and possibly incorporating into ACPF, merging with the crop data layer information would be nice. Okay, so this is a little map again of where CCAP is going to go, and a release in April of the coastal areas, so we can start looking at that. And phase 2, they're a little unclear when phase 2 will arrive, probably within the next 2 years. And then there's that buy up option that we need to figure out pretty soon, so they can get it in the processing. That leads us to kind of a theoretical experimental thing that we're hoping to test. And it's one of the terms that we use is analysis ready data, and ACPF is pretty close to that. The only thing is getting the DEM hydro enforced, and maybe updating some field boundaries, and then you're really ready to go and start doing work on the ground. So we've got a concept for an analysis ready data set. About a year ago, we started talking with our LiDAR contractor in a sort of research vein, and coming up with ideas how we could actually create various layers all from the same data, and in such a way that the features on the ground are represented in a similar manner. So if you've ever seen water bodies on the topo maps and in the NWI wetlands and in other land cover things, they're taken at different times and they're done to different models, and sometimes they don't represent each other well. They don't line up. And so we're trying to figure out a way to kind of improve on that. So we've come up with this, ultimately calling it one map. So here's our pilot area for this. And we do have some funding, again, through the nice folks at the Wisconsin Coastal Management Program who like to fund these off the wall ideas that'll make the world a better place. And their angle on this is we need better data to support habitat restoration and conservation efforts along the coast. And of course, that includes what's upstream in the watershed. So so that's the target for them. We have a local partner, our good friends at the Brown County Planning and Land Services Department. And we will pass the money to them, and they will do contracting with a reputable remote sensing contractor type place. And we also include the DNR folks as stakeholders and research partners on this. And so we're going to be working on 3 Huck 10s. An area of, I think, some 480 square miles with this NOAA BIL funding. So pretty good timing. Again, we're trying to integrate the LiDAR and imagery data into three federal layers. The hydro that Larry was talking about, the NWI wetlands, and the CCAP data, and then from that, trying to derive products that are of local use and state use in applications, and also creating an environment for collaborating to scale this up to the rest of the state. if it works. Okay, so again, Brown County, NOAA money. We've got 3 years to work on this, and we'll try to go through all those 3 steps there. As I said, the coastal management goal is to assess and rank coastal conservation project areas. And this is kind of how it was done in the past, you know, looking at various criteria, and we'll be trying to incorporate some of that into the GIS analysis. Again, here's the area, the 3 watersheds, the 3 Huck 10s, Duck Creek, East River, and Lower Fox, Green Bay. And you'll notice that the Oneida Nation is right in the middle of 2 of those. So we will have the opportunity to work with the planning staff from the Oneida Nation on some of their interests, which I think will be very exciting. You'll also notice that there's the proposed NER boundary stealthily put on the map there. This obviously hasn't been finalized or okayed, but these are some of the areas that they're looking at, and so we'll be cognizant of how this might help the management of those areas. And of course, it gets into Outagamie County, so we'll be looking to work with Jeremy and Sarah on their interests as well. So here's my little sort of mental map of how this might work. We've got lots of input data here along the bottom. We'll be using our NAPE data, our county information, 4-band leaf off, and the LiDAR, and then mushing it all together, or harmonizing, as we like to say, in this sort of black box, and then spitting out all these different federal and state layers. You know, this all looks rather simple and nice. I actually think this black box is where people are going to want to work, because it'll have all that information, all those data standards and things as part of the database. And so in a lot of ways, like the ACPF, the tools will evolve around this integrated piece here. And you know, you'll still have the individual output layers, but I think people are going to want to work in this space a lot more in the future. And again, another way of looking at that, you know, these are different silos. We got national data, state, county, watershed, and then all these different layers. And we really do think that the one map data will start to span at least the you know, the different layer types, so that they are integrated more or less. Okay, so that's pretty much the end of the spiel. There's lots of things we could talk about, and if you see anything on this list that you would like more information about, you certainly can contact us. You know, there's just oodles and oodles of interesting stuff going on in the coastal areas. There's lots of bathymetry and topography projects, lots of coastal wetland mapping going on. We do have a culvert inventory database project, again, that's primarily focused in the coastal areas, but is trying to expand to the rest of the state. DNR has their wetlands inventory. We have various imagery programs. We got WROC 2025 coming up. Of course, there's the WLIP, the various things that we work on there. There's coming an environmental equity tool, very much like EJ Screen, that the state is sponsoring, and we're hoping that comes online here in the next couple months. It has to be okayed by the governor's office. And then Larry and I actually co-host a geospatial working group for the Wisconsin Climate Change Impacts initiative. And we're primarily working with folks at UW, couple other universities. And one of the early projects that we had was Eric Compass at Stevens Point, or Whitewater, I can't remember which, converted some of the climate projection data that one of the modelers did at UW and turned it into a GIS format so that people can use that in their projects. And then we've got our kind of wish list for funky stuff in the future, and I'll just leave it at that. We had mentioned training opportunities. There will be that ACPF training coming up. We have in the past done a LiDAR training, and we haven't done that in quite a while, but we need to revisit that, I think, because we are getting this new high resolution data, and it's a lot different to work with. And then we've mentioned several areas that we think are opportunities for us to collaborate on various things. There's obviously the stuff that our WLIP has been working with the counties, and as Mike mentioned in the chat, that they used some of their different grants that they get through WLIP for LiDAR, and they could probably think about using that for things like hydro and land cover and other things that they need. And hopefully you all talk to them on a regular basis. If not, we would be more than happy to try and facilitate that, or at least get some discussion going. Larry, anything else on the partnerships you want to mention?
Well, for hydro, I guess I mentioned a few ways we might want to partner. I think we want to try to do more outreach to counties and other organizations to see how we can collaborate to get it done. So that might take the form of funding, pooling our funding together, but I think it'd be great if we could also explore using hydro data that counties have developed, and it really helps that land conservation and other staff are out in the field and have availability potentially to help us field check things. I think that might be another good way to help collaborate on our efforts.
Yeah, okay. Todd or Mike, do you want to jump in with any ideas? These are our coastal management folks, and they always have ideas. So, and I think they're part of this Great Lakes community.
So, Jim, I don't know if this group would benefit to hear a little bit about the WICD, and I don't know, maybe Larry, you mentioned the geospatial group for Wiki, and then the Wisconsin Department of Tourism is also working on an asset-based outdoor recreation map.
Yeah, I forgot about that.
Yeah, so, and I'm working with them right now to add a little bit of capacity to that, to see it, to sort of invigorate it a bit. So, yeah, just involved in lots of different things. Certainly our hazards work group has done a lot. Our oblique photography. The counties have taken various advantages of the LiDAR imagery, looking at top of bluff work and things like that. So
yeah,
it's a great collaboration, between my land information, coastal programs, and Larry's work. And Larry's been a great partner for the land information program going way back a few jobs ago. So we really appreciate him.
Yeah, I'm going to try to, you mentioned things that I had forgotten, unfortunately. I'm going to try to assemble a list that we can send folks, and they can either contact us or go to the website if there is one. So that'll hopefully happen here in the next couple of days. Todd, you got anything you want to blurt out?
Nothing else to add. I think you guys captured everything, at least the highlights that are, I think, most relevant.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, so gosh, we made it under an hour, and we've got 5 minutes if we want to have any questions.
Yes, I see that Larry's been responding to a bunch of questions in the chat so far. So thank you, Larry, for doing that. I believe one that we have was during your second part of your presentation, Jim, was, so does this NOAA project have any overlap with the USDA crop scale data for crop histories? And then the person added that data set has some limitations on crops.
I think we're talking about the crop data layer that NAS puts out. So that is the layer that goes into ACPF and gets aggregated by the field boundaries. And so it is a 30-meter resolution data set, and so it does miss smaller things. And also that aggregation process also helps get rid of noise, but at the same time it does leave out smaller things. And so I think the CCAP, the high resolution CCAP, will sort of augment that. I don't, a lot of people worry about overlap and inefficiency. We don't see it like that. It's one way to verify what somebody else is saying, for one thing, but there are also good things about the 1 meter CCAP that are not captured by the crop data layer, and those are certainly the natural areas, the forested areas are better delineated. Certainly the impervious surfaces, if you're doing any kind of stormwater runoff modeling, you're going to want to use the CCAP data. Let's leave it at that.
Okay, thank you. And then somebody just added, so I'm curious to learn more about the climate change GIS feature you mentioned. Can you tell me what the data show? Like, you mentioned a model and the data extent. So, and then is this available to share? Thank you.
Okay. I think that would refer to Larry, our Eric's data. Okay, and so that's it is a model. It is I think there's a couple of different climate projections in there. I think there's the 8.5 RCP, and I think the 4.5 is in there. And what Eric has done has sort of aggregated it into I think yearly statistics. So it's very, it's the whole state and at a fairly coarse resolution. I don't remember exactly what it was, but it is trying to show I think temperature and precipitation were the two main variables. And so it's I believe they're finishing up the metadata for that, and that'll be available on the geodata at Wisconsin portal, data portal, and hopefully people can figure out how to use it. I think that's definitely something that needs some kind of a training aspect, so that it's they can figure out how best to use it. So
yeah, just to add to that, that data will include projections 30 years out. I think it's a monthly time step. So there will be a lot to look at. I think we're planning to develop some visualizations of projected climate change with the data. So I believe Eric Compass is going to help us with that as well. And the format will be a a cloud GeoTIFF format. So I think we will have some training and documentation about how to use those data.
Yeah. Does that help, Michelle?
And Michelle, feel free to unmute yourself too if you can, and you can answer visually or do a follow-up as well. And then if anybody else has questions, feel free to put them in the chat.
That's Eric Compass, and he's at UW Whitewater. Is that right, Larry?
Yep.
Yeah. COMPAS. Okay.
One thing about the climate change initiative too, for Wiki, the Wisconsin Climate Change Initiative, that group put out an assessment report last year. And it has a lot of great maps and graphics in it. So I'd really recommend taking a look at that. I'll throw a link in the chat to that. So the data we were just talking about is used in a lot of the maps in this report. So we're hoping to make it more broadly available through GeoData at Wisconsin so people can delve into it for other analyses that they might have.
And that brings up another point, Larry. We are kind of looking for some ideas for projects that we can work on with some of the other wiki working groups, like the ag group or fisheries or forestry, and you know, using our expertise in GIS and data to you know, to run some whatever makes sense, models of flooding, carbon sequestration, or you know, any of those things on a particular geography. And I know there's some really great work that Monroe County soil conservation folks have done. So kind of in that vein, and you know, think about that in terms of you know, a possible opportunity, you know, with some of this funding that's available through either the IRA or the BIL grants. It's a lot of money out there, and we've got to figure out some way to grab some and do some good with it.
Larry, did you mention LiDAR as a tool for measuring carbon sequestration potential?
I didn't mention that, I guess, but I think there's definitely capability there. So I guess the higher resolution LiDAR that Jim mentioned that we want to follow through on would be helpful for measuring biomass, right?
Yeah, Jim's worked with Bayfield County in particular, isn't it, Jim?
Yeah, and we think that that's in other states they're a little farther ahead than our forestry department. So we'd certainly like to work with folks, county forestry departments on kind of figuring out what this is as people move to turn these into what do you call them, the carbon credits. Bayfield is doing a lot of that, and it's supposed to generate about $1 million a year for them, which is pretty nice. So we think there's a lot of potential there.
One thing to add about climate work too is in your work, I would think about you know, incorporating it into design work for culverts, other structures. We have to design for climate resiliency. So,
yeah.
And I'd mention that Christina Anderson with Wisconsin Land Water is our climate resilience manager right now. And I know she's done a lot of work with a few of the groups that I've mentioned. So for county folks out there, if you are looking for a few more resources, Christina's another great person to contact. And her real focus right now is climate resiliency with the counties. So she's another great person.
Yeah. Very good.
Well, thank you, Jim and Larry, so much for presenting. This was fantastic. And there's definitely been a few thank yous in the chat. So I think people have really gotten a lot out of it. I'm just gonna kind of wrap us up here and just remind everybody that I'll be sending out an evaluation link shortly, along with a link to that recording. And one of the things I'll also be doing is sharing some of the resources that were in the chat through the email and attached to the recording. So people should be able to find those pretty easily. I think that is about it. We are going to now transition into the Great Lakes Committee meeting, which is on the same link. So if you plan to attend that meeting, feel free to stay on. Otherwise, everybody is okay to log off if you're not going to the meeting. But thank you again, everybody, and have a great day.